Happening now, we want to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good evening. My name is Jason Neifer, and I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the fabulous state virtual school located in Missoula, Montana, USA. And I am joining you tonight from smoky Missoula, where we have several wildfires that are literally fired up around the city. So it's pretty smoky outside. It's been pretty hot, mid 90s, upper 90s for the last 2 or 3 weeks. And so I am hiding tonight in my basement, hoping to chill out a little bit, as it were. And joining me, as always, who is not in his normal location tonight, Dr. Wes Fryer. Good evening, Wes. How you doing?
Good evening. I'm joining tonight from Burlington, Vermont, where my wife and I are having a chance to attend the Create, Make, and Learn Institute, and it has been delightfully cool, a respite from what you would normally think would be high temperatures in Oklahoma, but we actually looked today and it was like in the 80s and 70s, and so I guess maybe they're getting a bit of a cold front. But yeah, excited to join, and very, very apologetic that last week I fell into a hole, as it were, with yeah, a project that just I sort of lost sense of all space and time. So Jason, for leaving him hanging. I will try not to stand you up anymore, Jason, for the EdTech Situation Room, and I'm sure we had thousands that were hanging with bated breath wondering what had happened, but I do apologize to everybody. It was my fault.
Well, I still am quite delighted that you got stuck into a WordPress project and your head was so deep into it that time and space didn't seem to matter. So I love projects like that, and I love that you get stuck in something like that. So we got a lot of interesting EdTech news to go through tonight. I would imagine that we won't get through even a small percentage of our links tonight. And by the way, if you're interested in seeing the source articles that kind of guide our discussion, you can go to our website, www.edtechsr.com, where we always post each week's links. And there's always way more than we have the time to go through. Sometimes we're able to recycle those links to future weeks, and sometimes we're not. So, Wes, lots of interesting discussions we can start with tonight. Where would you like to take us first?
Well, actually, let's go to an article from yesterday. It just dropped in Ars Technica. After 3 years, iPad sales are up again for Apple. And I know that at our school, there have been a few iPad purchases. Actually, for our family, the fact this is the first time ever that I'm aware of that the price of the iPad, the low-end iPad, actually went down as the memory and capability went up. So Apple is no longer selling 16 gig iPads. 32 gig is the minimum. And there's the two different lines, what's I guess called the 5th generation iPad and then the iPad Pro. But says it was impressive third quarter financials, higher than predicted. So, Jason, are you on the edge of a new Mac purchase with some of the challenges that you've had with your connectivity lately?
With technology lately, I'm not. Although I do think it is super interesting that the iPad did receive an uptick in sales. And I still think one of the biggest problems with Apple in sales in the iPad is not that the iPad isn't awesome. I still think it is by far the best-in-class device, right? There is no tablet, in my humble opinion, that comes even close to the functionality and kind of long-term usage of an iPad. But I think the problem that I've seen with iPads is that they're just too sturdy, right? That if you keep yours in protective case, or if you're not clumsy, then an iPad can, I think, well, I know people that are very successfully running iPad 2s, which would be, are those 2011 devices? Is that right? 2011, 2012? It would be 2011 because 2010 was the first iPad, right? So these are the 2nd generation devices. We are many devices ahead now, and I still know people that are very successful using their iPad 2 and don't seem to be experiencing anything that you might otherwise experience with a 6-year-old piece of hardware. And that's a really impressive feat on Apple's part, that they managed to create something that seems like it has such long-term stability. And I think because of that, a lot of folks that otherwise might update pretty frequently in the curve aren't doing so. And in fact, my iPad is a Mini 2, which I believe is a 3-year-old product now. I find the iPad Air form factor to be compelling. I find the iPad Air 2 form factor to be compelling. I find the new iPad Pros in their larger size to be a compelling form factor. But to be quite frank, my Mini 2 does exactly what I need my iPad to do, and not even just consumption-wise, but also functionality-wise. And Apple, should be complimented. It's one of the many products that has a long a lifespan. MacBooks can last forever. Mac desktops can last forever. The higher-end hardware, the software compatibility help that. But I do think it's encouraging for Apple that that's ticked up. Are you considering updates?
Oh, well, I'm actually on my wife's MacBook Air, so she has gone to work for our school and just happened to be cycling in at the time of the 5-year refresh. So I had actually a few issues with the smaller MacBook that I think has the A7 processor with just with the Google Hangout. Sometimes it getting pretty hot. But no, there's not. We did upgrade our son's phone. He'd been having some trouble with GPS, and we got stuff reset. So I think of our rising 8th grader who feels that she has been, slighted as getting all the hand-me-down phones. There aren't any other foreseeable iOS updates or iPad updates. I will say, though, that on the same note of Apple revenue and thinking about Apple, finance and business, you might have heard in the last week, I guess, this kerfluffle over Tim Cook, Apple CEO, and Donald Trump, and what supposedly Cook had said to Trump. And I dropped the Mac Observer article from August 1st, Tim Cook on Trump's Apple factory statement, "Let's talk about something else." And so I heard a few different podcasts talk about this, and it's kind of confusion over what Apple agreed to do. The consensus I heard more on tech podcasts was, Apple is going to continue to, have devices produced where it's less expensive, which is probably going to mean mainly China. But I think they have announced an opening of a new factory in India. However, some things may be put together in the United States. And so, where you open an Apple product that says designed in California, I think it was on the Clockwise podcast, somebody was joking, may say designed in California, manufactured in China, assembled, back in the USA or whatever. But I think that in terms of educational impact, Apple is a huge player. Network effects are at play. We're not going to see Apple, Amazon, Microsoft really be displaced from their be a moth, spots. But on the same economic note, I guess I heard that, did you get this? Jeff Bezos surpassed Bill Gates as the wealthiest individual in the world. So while there's not going to be displacement and any of these companies go off the map, former CEO of Microsoft has now been officially displaced by Amazon CEO. So I don't know. Do you think any of this economics has implications for schools at this point?
I do. I think that, let's say, going back to Steve Jobs for a moment, Steve Jobs told his biographer with the great Steve Jobs biography that those jobs were lost because not only because they'd be hard to bring them back, but because that American consumers wouldn't put up with the expense of a $1,500, $2,000 iPhone, right? And if you think about that, that's also true of iPads. It's also true of laptops. It's also true of Mac desktops, right? And where it does impact schools is that there are a lot of people that think that Apple is too grandiose of a purchase for a school because of the premium price you pay for those products. I would argue to you can get more lifetime wise out of a typical Apple product than a cheaper plasticity, not very updatable Windows product. But that's a discussion we could have another time. But if iPads cost $1,500 at minimum, that is going to create a disincentive to put those devices in school. And I got to say, Apple used to be pretty good about creating devices at the kind of medium end to deal with schools. You may remember back to the roundish white plastic MacBook. It was the last.
It's a workhorse.
Yeah, it was amazing. And the best part about it was that yeah, you lose the metal and the pretty design, but that plastic case was pretty ballistic. And if it broke, people stuck duct tape on it and it worked just fine, right? It was a very ballistic machine. And Apple's not really doing that anymore. You could argue that the newer iPad, the cheaper, newer iPad, is maybe an attempt at a play at education, but Apple's just not doing that anymore. And so if, a manufacturing play does bring jobs back to the United States, but then dramatically increases the price of those products, that's not going to help schools either. And there's a balance there. I'm just not sure if I understand where it's at.
I will say that the price drop that we've seen in the iPad is a pretty big deal. When you look at Chromebooks and this conference or institute that I'm attending right now, which, by the way, just phenomenal. Gary Steger and Sylvia Martinez put on a great modern knowledge, what is it called? Constructing Modern Knowledge conference. I think that's in Manchester, New Hampshire every year, which I have not attended, but is they have phenomenal speakers, and I've heard good things about their experience. There's a few more STEM things popping up. Anyway, the preponderance of teachers here are in schools, mainly in Vermont, that have definitely more Chromebooks than they do iPads, and so the 2 days of media making that I was leading were focused mainly on folks that have iPads I keep on saying iPads because I got them on the mind, on Chromebooks. And so we were creating media with WeVideo. I had a chance to really get in depth and use the green screen and do some collaborative projects. And, Apple is feeling the heat from Google. And so I think that the reduction in cost of the iPad was a factor driving these sales that they had. But like you mentioned, Jason, the fact that Apple devices last so long is wonderful for us as consumers. And if we choose to buy these devices at school, it's great. But from Apple's bottom line, that means there's less churn in their production cycles as far as when you're going to be refreshing. So
right.
we want to welcome Jamie Camp and Peggy George, who are live in our chat room, and welcome anybody else who would like to. If you're going to watch us live, you are watching us live, join in the chat, let us know you're there, and chime in with any questions or comments that you have. So Jamie, I was asking if they were going to contemplate any upgrades, and Jamie says she's been kicking around the idea of getting an iMac, but she's just used a MacBook Pro, and the old one's reaching an age where it needs to be replaced. And Peggy is looking at an upgrade for her iPad, but she's still using an older MacBook Pro. So we've put some SSDs, some solid state drives in older MacBooks, and have them continuing on, and aren't going to probably be keeping them for 10 more years, but they're going to work for the foreseeable 2 to 3 years, and then we'll just have to kind of see what else happens in the marketplace, because there's a lot going on. Have you, by the way, Jason, gotten a hold of a Microsoft laptop running this Windows S or whatever the special
Windows 10S? No, I've not, and I've actually worked at this a little bit, and I've been trying to work some of my back channel contacts to see if I can get even a preview edition of one. I'm not in the market for $1,000 Windows 10S device, even though I hear that those new the Surface laptops are really fine pieces of hardware, from my understanding, nice and sturdy. Although many of the consumer tech reviewers have said that the first thing they did after an hour or two of frustration with Windows 10S is did the conversion to Windows 10 Pro, and found it to be a better piece of hardware from that. But I have not yet, and I'm guessing that probably my first access to one will be one of the low-end ones that Dell, HP, I believe Lenovo is all committed to putting out low-cost Windows 10S devices aimed at schools. Which does remind me of something, Wes, that you had mentioned earlier that I think is an important part of this discussion. When you're buying a $100 Chromebook, it's an amazing bargain. Don't get me wrong, right? The things you can do on a $100 Chromebook is well exceeds the $100 you're paying for it. But a $100 Chromebook becomes much less usable much more quickly than the $1,200 MacBook Air, where you are going to have 5, 6, 7 years worth of use in it for the typical user, whereas a Chromebook, as over time will continue to receive updates until its end of life policy from Google. And right now, that amount of time for new Chromebooks is 6.5 years after release. They'll release new updates. But, you know, the software keeps getting more complex. Chrome compels you to update to the latest version. You don't have a choice in that matter, which means that if the software becomes too complex for the hardware that you have at 2 or 3 years old, there's a lot of chipsets that are sold with cheap Chromebooks that aren't super great at multitasking. They aren't great at productivity. They aren't great at having a YouTube video and a Google Doc in the background. You're going to find that $100 purchase isn't going to get you very far. And I think that's an important piece of this discussion.
And here's a huge thing that comes to mind, having just, you know, been working with teachers largely on Chromebooks for, you know, Monday and Tuesday. Please, please, if you're using a Chromebook, install Tab Suspender or another extension which automatically suspends tabs that you have open and are not using, because there were numerous teachers in the workshops that had maybe 20 at the extreme tabs open in the Chromebook, and then we're having trouble and things were crawling, and I was like, let's close all your tabs except for, you know, WeVideo and Google Drive. And then, have you heard of Tab Suspender? You know, sharing that with everybody. Ben Wilkoff shared that maybe 3 or 4 years ago at a Colorado Google Summit, and that has absolutely been one of my key tabs that even on the Mac using Chrome dramatically increases the speed. So yeah, it's exciting to see, I guess, the low common denominator, the low bar of expectation rise for devices. But, you know, we don't need to descend down to the 2009 era of netbooks where things were so sluggish and you know, poorly capable that we really couldn't do what we needed to do, you know, with them. But I think technology is on our side with that, and schools, you know, processors are just going to continue to get faster and faster. And the need to have a niche device that does more than the web is going to continue to be smaller and smaller. And I am more convinced than ever that there's multiple ways to look at blended learning and one-to-one and technology device, but we're in a multi-device world. And so looking at a Chromebook as a basic level device and then supplementing that either with smartphones that students provide themselves or iPads, or they might be Android tablets, although I haven't had any experience at all managing those or hearing people have positive experiences with management. Of course, Apple can be challenging too. But that's kind of what I foresee, and I can't disclose lots of details, but I'm going to be doing more and more thinking and work along these lines professionally, you know, looking at numbers and looking at some proposals, which I'll hopefully be able to disclose, you know, in a few months. So that's kind of some of my thinking about one-to-one. So Jason, you want to take us to another article? We started a little bit late, so we're not quite halfway through, but we've got a ton on the plate. So I didn't mean to dominate it with Apple talk tonight.
Quite all right. I think it's an important story. So let's talk about this one because I thought it was a pretty interesting piece. This is from EdSearch on July 17th. The headline is, how much do educators care about EdTech efficacy? Less than you might think. And this really great article goes through a study that talks about how much teachers care about how much research goes into the technology tools that are adopted by their classrooms, schools, and districts. And the study itself goes into some detail about the notion of that teachers didn't seem to care all that much, and that it wasn't either extremely important or very important, that there was some research backing of the tools that they were adopting in their classrooms. And I found this to be quite fascinating for a couple of different reasons. The first one is that I do feel like that we're in an environment where people like to use research sometimes as a bludgeon to push or shoehorn their view into a conversation. Unfortunately, that research isn't an actual citation of a real study. It's just the comment that research says X or research says Y. So that, I think, is an interesting juxtaposition to this particular study's claim. But the second piece of that is that I do wonder quite a bit how much vendor speak, vendor marketing, vendor influence on districts is driving more decisions related to purchasing of technology tools than actual evidence of effectiveness in the classroom environment. So I guess I'd start with Wes. Do you feel like that this research is true to your reality? Do people take efficacy in mind when adopting tools?
Well, by defining efficacy here, I think they're looking at, peer-reviewed journal articles, and really those don't add much weight, I think, in the world in which I live. In an ideal sense, they should. We should all be very attuned to what the latest research is doing. I think that reports from the trenches, peer schools, other folks in similar situations who are using devices, who've tried things, definitely have a bigger impact. It's networking. It's trusted people in my network who, have had experiences, good or bad, and have recommendations to make. I think those are the ones that have more sway than articles that I might read, especially journal articles. So yeah, this wasn't a surprise to me, and I agree with your comment that I think oftentimes research can be used as a bludgeon, and people will pull it out at a convenient time to say, well, the research has said, but I think there's still a pretty big disconnect. And you're in the middle of this, Jason, not to say that you need to criticize your program in academia writ large, because you're waiting to get that doctorate soon. And I know there's lots of people on, your committee and your future, anyway, who are listening tonight. But yeah, I'm not saying anything people don't generally acknowledge. There can be some large gaps between higher education and between K-12. And I think we have an ongoing need to, bring those worlds of research and practice together. And perhaps this article is a reflection of that, saying that, a lot of practitioners are not looking at those research articles.
Sure. And then I would also add to that, you always want to be mindful of the quality of the research that you're citing. And in fact, even when a vendor comes in and provides you a number of research citations, and I will tell you, I've had some experience with that with various interactive whiteboard sales folk that will cite a number of studies that prove the efficacy of their particular product in a classroom environment. And one of the two questions I immediately ask when that's happening is, first, actually read the research. And if you haven't done so, you should do so before you cite it. A lot of research is not great, and a lot of research is based off of maybe situations that are too far from your own, which means they don't provide a lot of generalizability to your instance or your implementation in the classroom. The second piece is that there is a lot of research that is academic research, I'll put that in quotation marks, that is funded by someone who has an interest in the outcome of that research. Even university research occasionally will have a funder that has a very a big stake in the outcome of that research. And so I think it's a balancing act, as you suggest, Wes, that you have to use your gut sometimes, and you have to innovate sometimes by going against what the conventional wisdom, the research proven conventional wisdom might say. But at the same time, you should be looking at what peer science has to offer you, and then balance those things between the two. So interesting story, I thought.
I want to give a shout out to Vicky Sedgwick, who's joining us in the chat room. We got a lively chat room tonight, so thank you all so much for chiming in. And we want to remind everybody, we're about halfway through the show. You can access all the links, and I know there's probably going to be a bunch tonight, especially that we don't have time to talk about. So those we discuss and those we don't at edtechsr.com/links. And I would like to jump down to one that'll try to change the topic quite a bit. The title is Genetically Modified Moth May Soon Be Coming to New York Crops. And this was in Smithsonian Magazine back in July, on July 11th, 2017. And we have talked before on the show a little bit about genomics and about STEM and about the importance of helping students know about these kinds of careers. And the article is saying that there's a lot of damage being caused by this diamondback moth, and so there's a company that's had success in some other countries putting a modified version of a particular insect into the population where there's a different gene or a gene modification. It spreads among male moths, and then it kills female moths, and eventually the moth population crumbles because their ability to replicate, has been devastated by this genetic manipulation. The company is called, I guess, Oxtic. I don't know how to pronounce that. Oxitec. They've been doing engineered mosquitoes in Brazil, Panama, and on Grand Cayman. And so now, and there's also experiments coming to parts of Western Australia with the Mediterranean fruit fly. So I had a great conversation tonight with Sarah Sutter and some others that are here for our conference. Sarah is at a American school in Tokyo where they have a synthetic, what does she call it? A synthetic genetics course where the students are doing just amazing stuff and doing a year-long project and working with Harvard. And, I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish my kids could take something like that. So we were talking about not only the future employability of students who are in, chemistry, biology, the connection between technology and biology, but we're also talking about DNA testing and stuff like that. So what do you think, Jason? Have you sent off your DNA for testing? And do you have any strong opinions about genetic modification of moths or other insects coming to you soon in Missoula?
I'll admit I am extremely tempted by 23andMe, which is the at-home test. And I'll admit that I've been sucked in by the advertising that talks about, what are your genetic ancestors. I do have some folks in my family that are really into genealogy, and so I have a basic idea of our storyline, but I'm pretty sure that there's some interesting slices in my genetics that aren't accounted for in any of those efforts for genealogy. But as I've spoken in the past on the podcast, I am someone that experiences significant chronic health problems. I am very much on the mend. I had a kidney transplant 2 years ago from a childhood ailment that wasn't discovered until I was an adult. And so I'm a little sensitive to the notion of having medical-like data in a service that I don't directly control. Now, that said, the great thing about it is that I could tomorrow decide that I'm going to sign up for 23andMe and just use completely fake information except my actual DNA, and then they wouldn't know who I am. And so it's all good to go. So there's some consumer power there, but I still think there's a lot of unanswered questions that we need to, come to terms with before I'm comfortable with a lot of the genetic modification questions that are ahead of us. And some of you may have read also today that there was a release of a research study that has been talked about for the last week or so, and the actual study is released today. And I want to make sure I get this right. I read it in the New York Times this morning, but they've announced that there was actual genetic editing that was successful. And I want to get this right because I don't understand the science super well. So I'm going to pause for just a moment and grab the actual article.
Yeah, the article is titled, "In Breakthrough, Scientists Edit a Dangerous Mutation from Genes." Scientists for the first time have successfully edited genes in human embryos to repair a common mutation, producing apparently healthy embryos, according to a study published on Wednesday.
Yep. And it just so happens I was directed to that
21st century.
Absolutely. Sorry. And well, that's quite all right. Well, and that inspires a lot of interesting, dreaming actually, and some nightmares too. But like there's a lot of interesting pieces there, and the science is going to necessarily work in a faster way than the ethics around it, right? And so it's not too soon at all, I think, to start having a set of careful conversations about what this means and what the rules are for this and putting it into place. Not unlike, how we've been caught a little bit off guard the last 20 years by how technology's impacted our culture. We have to have the same conversations around that particular technology.
So some connections to that. We've talked on the show at length about the importance of ethics and STEM, and whether we're talking about coding and the folks that are running startups and developing our social media platforms, or whether it's in this arena of biology and technology, we need to be talking about ethics. I had an opportunity a few weeks ago to be in St. Mary's, Kansas, which is just 30 miles from my hometown where my parents live. At a wonderful little week-long conference called Cavate, and one of the techs at the St. Mary's school has been in his an undergraduate program, and I was thrilled to hear him talk about how his professor was putting in different case studies of ethics involving coding and what they would do or they wouldn't do, or if there was a line where things would be crossed depending upon whether it involved privacy and personal information that they were obtaining, or kids, or different kinds of scenarios. So that's something that I've mentioned and talked about, and it was just great to hear about a professor, this was at a community college in Kansas, who is doing that kind of thing. So that is not something, I don't think, that's going to be in the curriculum, but maybe it can fit in through digital citizenship. I don't know. I'm not sure what the entry point for that would be. Maybe it's health education. I don't know. How many do you know anybody, Jason, that has actually done the 23andMe and gotten the responses? I don't think I know anybody who's done that, or at least that's told me.
I know two people that have done it, and both of them were science teachers, and so I think they had kind of an academic interest in the concept as much as a personal interest. And there is a lot of things you agree to when you do that particular service. I've heard some people refer to it as a bit of a privacy challenge from that standpoint, but the bottom line is that in the same way that genetics has kind of changed the way we look at biology over the last 25 years. And in fact, a lot of biology teachers have explained to me that the way we teach biology has evolved quite dramatically in the last 15 years due to genetics. It's an area that has so much potential to provide you insight on you and your health and the way you're built. I think we're going to have a hard time stopping people from taking advantage of that information, whether it's positively or negatively. So, yeah, there's some ethics discussions that need to go on here. I'm not sure if they're happening in a way yet that are as fast as the technology is developing.
Probably good things. Well, I don't know if that's good things or not. They say don't talk about religion and politics, in mixed company. But I think about, Thanksgiving, Christmas holidays, when we get together with relatives. These are important things to turn over. Whether we're able to do that professionally in the classroom, or whether we do that with our immediate family or with extended family. I mean, these are issues that we're going to be running into, right? Our students, our children are going to have different kinds of choices when it comes to, reproduction and childbirth and our own health, as far as things that we're going to do. And I think some things are going to be fantastic. I think that CRISPR, has both that potential to be a Frankenstein and also a miraculous healer that we've just dreamed about in terms of the kinds of ailments and diseases and conditions that it's going to be able to help us cure. So we are becoming hybrids, right? We are becoming cyborgs. In fact, does Time Magazine, I didn't pull this up, but isn't there a headline where they've got like the Apple Watch is only the beginning, and it shows like, I don't know if it's a virtual projection of chips and things like that, but we're becoming hybrids with our devices, and biologically that's going to become even more of a reality. It is for some people even now.
Absolutely.
Where do you want to take us next?
Well, I would like to give you, fair listeners, a warning from The Verge on July 26, 2017. Do not blindly trust companies selling solar eclipse glasses on Amazon.com. And it's not like they're not legit. You just don't know if they're legit or not. And it's a fascinating article that I think inspires a lot of interesting questions related to, you mentioned earlier that Jeff Bezos is the richest man on Earth now, but Amazon, and I have another kind of related topic to that in a moment. Amazon is a buzz now with solar eclipse glasses because there's going to be a really incredible solar eclipse in the United States where you could go anywhere from Oregon to South Carolina and see a total solar eclipse. But of course, that comes with some risk to your eyes, staring into the sun and such. And so a lot of people have taken advantage of this by offering solar eclipse glasses on Amazon. The problem with that, of course, is that not everyone is selling legitimate solar eclipse safe glasses. And some people are noticing that the product they're getting in the mail is not one that's been certified or has anything other than tinted panes of plastic in the solar eclipse glasses. So I guess I have to start with, Wes, are you anywhere in the solar eclipse zone?
We are just south of it. However, we have school starting on the 21st. So
yeah,
I don't know how that's going to work. I was mentioning that to my wife the other day. I was like, glasses, for kids to go outside and try to look. So from what I've seen, and I think we had a Geek of the Week a few weeks ago about a Google project where they're going to crowdsource photos from it and show, what it actually looks like as it crosses the United States. We're gonna be over half obscured, but we're not gonna be fully obscured. Where my parents are up in Kansas, because I think it's going. We were up, in Jackson Hole in your neck of the woods, and it's gonna go right over there and then heading northeast. And so you only have to go maybe less than an hour, 45 minutes north of my parents to be in the direct band of the eclipse. So what are your plans, Jason? When I was in Jackson, Wyoming, they were sort of like battening down the hatches, ready for craziness with probably thousands of people coming to town, filling the streets, and causing a lot of mayhem with just so many bodies. So is Missoula going to be chock full of out-of-town foreigners there to witness the event?
We're not in a full eclipse path. Apparently, you'll be able to see a partial eclipse here, but my understanding from my lovely wife is that there's a drive from here, I think 3 or 4 hours from here, where you can see it in Idaho. So she's talked about doing that. My hesitation with that was the same as yours, Wes, is that it's close to the beginning of the school year for my program, and the closer the year gets, the less flexibility I have in my schedule. But I hear that even when you are not near the path, it should be a pretty interesting thing to see. So I am really great to hear. It's really great to hear that there will be a lot of amateur photography available and collected by folks like Google so that you can see it in various parts of the United States.
And I guess we should just find out where you can get verified glasses, right? I mean, it's like a fake news, verify the source, all that.
Well, and I want to mention something related to that for just a second. And it just so happens that I have my charger with me. Amazon is a risky buy if you don't know what you're purchasing, right? And the reviews help sometimes and that sort of thing. But the thing I thought of when I read this article was that USBC, which is the new standard that will slowly start taking over for not only USB ports, but also charging of many devices. For a while, USB-C cables and chargers, many of them on Amazon. USB-C is a very advanced protocol. It's not just a dumb current of electricity. There's actually a negotiation that goes on between your charger, the cable, and the computer that you're on that's being charged by USB-C. And a lot of people were selling devices that did not have standards-based chargers, and they were literally toasting their devices. And my Chromebook is a USB-C charge device, and the charger that came with it's kind of big and bulky. And so I spent some time, and I went with known quantities. Anker's a popular brand name for chargers, and so I have my Anker charger and I have my Anker cable that plug into my Chromebook, and that's been great for me. But I think that it is a buyer beware situation, especially when you're talking about low cost items where there are hundreds of options to go with. And so definitely reading reviews and kind of knowing what you're buying is a critical part of that process.
Definitely. Well, we've got about probably 15 minutes or so left in the show. I would love for us to talk just briefly about cryptocurrency. And I want to give a shout out to our son, Alexander, who actually tweeted this video, or no, he didn't tweet it. He shared it on his Facebook. The video is by a channel called 3 Blue 1 Brown. Ever wonder how Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies work? A link to a Radiolab episode, and coincidentally, Vicky is recommending a Radiolab episode, which I'm going to have to check out. It's from July 27th. That one was called, well, I don't know what the title of it was actually. Well, no, Peggy's dropped in the link. It was about computer science and ethics topics, and the actual, let's see if it can come up. The one I wanted to is called The Ceremony, and it's about cryptocurrencies. The one that she referenced on July 27th was called Breaking News. This is an amazing episode because this Radiolab show is about how a cryptocurrency other than Bitcoin was started as far as the math and the trust that is needed to do this. And the video that my son had shared, which tangentially related, I got him to tweet on his account, and he's been an egg on Twitter for a long time, and he got his updated profile and talking about digital footprint and all that stuff. So I was pretty excited to have him do that and encouraging him to share stuff like this, you know, that he gets into. I think cryptocurrency is a huge thing for us to be, aware of and to understand. From an economic standpoint, it's fascinating how the monetary system actually works, right? We went off the gold standard in the United States during the Nixon administration. You can't, trade paper currency for, physical gold anymore. And, and this video is the best explanation of cryptocurrencies that I've seen, where basically you have a barter system where, a group would be exchanging IOUs, and then eventually, those could end up being traded for dollars. So, Jason, are you a cryptocurrency, pathological investor? And do you think Bitcoin will change the world tomorrow?
I have not invested in any cryptocurrency, and not because I'm not interested in it. It's partly because I don't understand it enough, and I try not to, throw money at things that I don't understand. I guess maybe my stock portfolio would suggest otherwise. But the bottom line is that it's a pretty confusing market, and I'm looking forward to this video because I would like to understand this phenomenon more. I do agree, though, that, I think a universal currency that's untraceable, that is able to work in this kind of dynamic digital environment is going to be something of our future, whether we like it or not. And I think there is a reason that it has survived despite many challenges from governments around the world that really don't want a competitor for currencies.
And the thing that's the underlying technology and really concept here is the blockchain. And I will not pretend to be an expert on the blockchain, but my limited understanding is, Bitcoin has every transaction recorded and broadcast, so there is no privacy. If you or I are opening our wallet with cash, we really have no idea, other than the person or place we got the money from, where that money was previously and the transactions that it was involved in. With Bitcoin, however, every single transaction that has ever happened, and that has very interesting implications for privacy. Some of these other cryptocurrencies are addressing that, where there is some anonymity. It is fascinating. And the blockchain itself as a technology has implications to potentially change many other things besides the way we pay for, goods and services. I'm fascinated by Apple now is about to, with iOS 11, have a payment system that we can send money back and forth to folks just directly, through iOS using Apple as our bank. And I need to get the name of it, but our cousins here in Vermont use an app all the time when they've got friends who pay for a soccer, jersey, or, get food when their kids are out or whatever. They're constantly using this app. It's not PayPal. It's something else. I think starts with a V. I'll get it and drop it into the show notes. But I think these are really, really huge things that, on the cryptocurrency side, hopefully we're not going to outlaw math, right? And math is what underlies all this. And it's stuff that, maybe you could make an argument that most people in society don't understand how the currency system works, and whether it's macroeconomics and interest rates and all that in the stock market or microeconomics. But I think these are fascinating articles, and I'll look forward to your feedback, Jason, because it's definitely the best explanation of this that I've seen, where they're just, laying out from scratch, here's how you can build a cryptocurrency. This is how Bitcoin came to be.
Absolutely. Yep. I'm glad to have access to it.
All right. Probably have time for another one.
Well, let's go ahead and do it. Adobe announced last week that Flash is not dead, but it will be dead in 2020. And I got to tell you, there are hordes of middle school Flash game players that will be totally saddened by the fact that their Flash games will no longer work in 3 years. So the bottom line is that Adobe has said they will stop supporting Flash in 2020, which means that which I think means that they will no longer update or provide security updates for the Flash plugin. That, of course, introduces massive a risk into the Flash universe, because Flash is very constantly updated, because it is a kind of a harbinger of security issues. And that effectively means that the transition, which probably began in 2010 with the release of the iPad, will be finally complete 10 years later, as Flash is no longer available. So I guess I'll start with Wes. Are you cursing the day that Flash is no longer a reality in your life?
Absolutely not. I remember when Steve Jobs was making these moves with the iPhone and with iOS to essentially kill Flash, really, thinking what a bold move that is on a corporate level to go after, something that, it was just a real. It was a time where I think someone, which of course Jobs wasn't a coder himself. He was much more on the creative, artistic side of things and the marketing and business side of things, but had a lot of insight because of his access to engineering teams about, huge shortcomings that entire protocol had, and good reasons why, for the long term of success and benefit of the web and consumers, it was going to be better to go with some other protocols, namely I think HTML5 and open protocols like that. So nope, I celebrate it. I think that we want to keep the web open. It's interesting when we have different proprietary solutions, and sometimes things. I'm thinking of banking, and there's a lot of times and places where there are proprietary solutions that are wonderful and we utilize them. But when it comes to the web and really the core tools that power communication, not just today but into the foreseeable future, those need to be openly accessible, and if not completely open, openly licensable, and just and they need to run cool. They don't need to heat up my device. I remember how hot laptops would get running Flash, and
Yep.
It was a real problem, and that was a problem on mobile as well as other devices. So I celebrate. How about you? Is that going to have a significant impact on distance learning in Montana and elsewhere, as we've got these artifacts that different companies have created over the years and used Flash and Macromedia?
There are still a lot of people that are selling digital objects that are based in Flash. That, of course, becomes really challenging for us in figuring out how to replace them. Interestingly enough, a lot of openly licensed content is stuck in Flash, and without money or resources to fix those things, some of those will become essentially dead technologies as Flash is depreciated. But I think, generally speaking, moving away from Flash is going to be a wonderful thing for distance learning. I remember reading some of the discussion in 2010, and you probably remember, Wes, that Steve Jobs was so passionate about the Flash issue, he released an open letter to answer criticisms that the iPad was not using Flash, and very aggressively laid out the case for the fact that Flash was not the not the panacea that people were making it out to be. But I remember a lot of the discussion around that topic at the time was twofold. The first one was that you mentioned battery life and the heating up of devices. The iPad would have had a battery life of about 90 minutes in 2010 if it was running Flash. But the secondary part of that was that a lot of people applauded Steve Jobs' move to HTML5 because if they hadn't done so, a year later when they moved towards an open app store environment, if people had built those applications largely in Flash, it would have slowed down the development of applications, because the typical high-end application in Flash would have used such an extraordinary amount of battery, and it created so much heat and instability for the system, it might have actually held off the mobile revolution that we experienced. And so, it's sad that some content might be lost, but it's time.
Couple good comments from the chat room, and thank you all for chiming in. Vicky reminds us that Scratch version 3 better be out before Flash is dead, because it still does require Flash. And it's interesting how the Chrome browser handles Flash now, right? By default, it doesn't turn it on, but when it's needed, you can have it. You can change your settings, but I think this is the default. You click and enable it on a page-by-page basis. But Scratch is certainly, I think, a huge educational platform and website and coding environment that we should be sharing with students, utilizing. And I'm sure that Mitch Resnick and the MIT Media Lab is hard at work at that. They've got a couple years to go. The other chat room comment, Jamie Camp got it right. It is Venmo, VENMO.com. That is the currency trading app that my cousins use, and Jamie said some friends of theirs use as well. Pretty interesting. Had not ever heard of that before, but in the context of currencies and money exchange, that's things are taking off. I kind of wish we had another hour to talk, although I do need to go to bed. It's the East Coast here, so it's 11 o'clock. But I want to mention two quick security articles and a SpaceX article, and then Jason, if you've got another one or two to mention, we can close out with our Geeks of the Week. But it's almost, this is a sign of the times, right? ZDNet July 12th, and we didn't even mention it, millions of Verizon customer records exposed in security lapse. We just continue to have, this is like part of the normal, hey, somebody got killed in Chicago or New York City this month. We're hearing about millions of records from huge companies being compromised. And so we've said this before, if you're not using a two-step security feature on your bank, on your Gmail, on whatever other kinds of important accounts that you have that offer two-step, do that. And if you're not using a password manager like LastPass or 1Password, start doing that today. The other article that's really fascinating, and I heard this on the Security Now podcast that the Twit Network publishes. This was a personal blog post on July 7th by the user who's just called Justin. And no, it's not Justin Bieber or Justin Timberlake, but his article said, I got hacked and all I got was this new SIM card. Pretty fascinating. Basically, somebody went after him directly, continued to call, I think AT&T or Verizon, probably I shouldn't throw him under the bus without getting that right, so his cell phone company, until he didn't have to provide his password, and then they were able to it was AT&T, and then they were able to reset his SIM card and then take over his phone. He had two-step verification turned on his accounts. This is not an example of a random attack. This is a specific targeted attack where they were going after him. But again, the weak link of almost all security is the human element, the human being. And so once they found an AT&T, call representative that didn't follow protocol and require his passphrase, they were able to get reset. And he was just on a trip driving when his phone stopped working. And then he finally pieced this together. And he ended up losing, I think, some money out of PayPal. And because this article went viral, I think PayPal refunded it. But otherwise, he thought, they wouldn't really care. And he was going to be out this money. So on the note of two-step verification, two-step through SMS, but actually that is a more vulnerable way. It's better to have two-step with SMS than to not have two-step. but you also can install apps like Google has one called Authenticator, and there's others, and they allow you to receive your two-step codes via Wi-Fi or your cell phone data connection, whatever you have. So those are both pretty important. The last one I will not talk about that much, but it was one of the most fascinating articles from the past week. This is from Gavin's blog. Obviously, everyone reads that. On July 15th, 2017. I think it was on Hacker Moon. Okay, I don't know what this site is either. But his article says, will SpaceX become the world's biggest telecom provider? Probably. And he says SpaceX now has a plan to launch almost 12,000 satellites into low space orbit and middle Earth orbit. Low Earth orbit is what I want to say. And we've heard about the Tesla Model 3 that's come out and hoopla about that. All the self-driving cars out there are going to need high-speed internet connections, and so Tesla very well may become the largest service provider on a global scale, providing satellite-based high-speed connectivity anywhere on the planet. And that article just kind of blew my mind. So sorry for the string of consciousness, 3 articles there, but any thoughts about security or SpaceX taking over actually maybe solving your internet bandwidth woes in rural Montana, Jason? Wouldn't that be great if Elon Musk took care of you that way?
I'd love that. If he could actually just maybe drop from a satellite a fiber wire and I just plug it in, we'd be good to go. So I think that's a great call. The article about the SIM card was absolutely fascinating because that's someone who knows what he's doing and takes all the advice that folks like you and me, Wes, dole out all the time. Like, this is the absolute way to be secure. As it turns out, there is no absolute way to be secure. Now, that said, you're also correct. Like, doing a little bit is better than doing nothing. Doing a lot's better than a little bit, even if you're not 100% protected, right? It's going to cover you in the vast majority of scenarios. But it was a pretty fascinating story that, no matter what you do, there's risk in these processes. So I'm going to add one last shout out here because it's a kind of a headline story. Snopes, which is the 20-year-old website that it kind of battles false information on the internet and, dare I say, fake news, is in a bizarre situation where it's fighting with its internet service provider in order to control its own website. And I couldn't even begin to describe to you the strange series of events. So I encourage you, the article we're citing is a very interesting article about the process from the New York Times. But I do suggest that you read through the process. But I did give $25 to Snopes last week in hopes that they can win the legal battle that they need to get control of their website back. I think in this era, as many resources as we can that attempt to evaluate news and information is a pretty great thing. So we want to be kind of on top of that. So definitely read the Snopes plight and consider giving to their cause.
All right, well, let's jump out with Geeks of the Week. I'll go first and then let you shut us down, Jason. I have actually just today confirmed with Peggy that I'm going to be a jump-in guest filling in for someone, which I'm grateful for the opportunity, on Classroom 2.0 Live Saturday. So I'm going to share a keynote that I had shared up in St. Mary's, Kansas about creativity, curiosity, and multimedia. And so if you can tune in, that will be at noon Eastern, 11 Central, 10 Mountain, or 9 Pacific. But my primary Geek of the Week is really cool, and I learned about it at that conference from the tech coordinator, Dina, in Oakley, Kansas. It's a website called ShoutKey. And when you're in a professional development setting, a lot of times you need to get a web link to people, and you don't have something set up in advance for a workshop or some kind of professional development. And you can use a URL shortener like goo.gl for Google, tinyurl, Bitly. One of the hazards of those, of course, is that if you get one letter wrong or one number wrong, you probably are going to go to another site and you have absolutely no control, no idea what that person is going to go to. So one way I've addressed that, copying and trying to mimic one of my heroes of EdTech, Tony Vincent, is to use my own URL shortener. So at least if someone mistypes, they're going to go to one of my shared web links, not somebody else's. But this website is called ShoutKey. It's shoutkey.com. And what it does is create web links which expire from 5 minutes to 24 hours after you share them, but it uses regular words. And so you're not getting some cryptic set of links. You know, you're actually just getting a regular English word. So I'll drop, for instance, the links in to our website, and I'll have this expire in 24 hours. So if you're listening to this more than that, it's not going to work. But it said spuds. So if you go to right now to shoutkey.com/spuds, SPUDS, you're going to be on the EdTech Situation Room links. And so anyway, I thought that was fantastic. And this is a tool that, could be useful in so many contexts. And of course, the fact that they expire is the reason why they can use regular words. They're not going to run out of words because all of their words become available on a 24-hour rotating cycle. So check it out, ShoutKey.
That's really, really freaking cool. I just tried it, and the word it gave me was this, like THIS. Right. So, yeah, that's awesome. And especially great with kids. Right. Because if you are trying to share it that way in a kind of spontaneous sort of way, if you've ever tried to have, people type in long URLs before, it's kind of a nightmare. So that's super great. Thanks, Wes. That's an awesome share. I'd like to share this week a little project I've been working on the last 6 weeks or so. I am very conscious about climate change, as I'm sure many of you are as well. And I don't think it's going to be one solution. I think it's going to be 1,000 solutions that are going to get us out of climate change, the implications of climate change. But one of the ways that I've tried to contribute positively is that by making sure that all of my devices are charged by a renewable means. And so one of the things I've set up is I'm using this Anker 21-watt dual USB solar charger, which is available right now from Amazon for $60, although it's pretty frequently on sale. So keep an eye out for sale prices. I have that hanging in my front window now, where it's every day that there's sun out in Montana, and luckily there is a lot of sun out in Montana this time of year. I'm charging one of those big portable battery packs that you've probably either seen on people or advertised that have 10,000 milliamp hours or 20,000 milliamp hours of storage space on it. But I am been charging those large batteries and then using those at night to charge my devices. And so it's not probably a cost savings. Frankly, your phone and your tablets don't take up a lot of expense when it comes to power. You can charge an iPhone for like $2 a year for even the most expensive power in the United States. It's not that expensive to charge a device like that over a series of weeks, months, or a year. But I think it's some of the way we're going to be able to deal with evolving climate change is to find alternative means to kind of cobble together a power a strategy, not unlike Elon Musk's household revolutionary battery. I think there's a lot of ways that we could be harnessing power that's available to us to power devices. So that's Anker's a solar charger available at Amazon.com.
Sounds good. Well, folks can find me online at speedofcreativity.org. I've just posted a little thing I'm pretty excited about, a Choose Your Own Adventure video and lessons learned from that. That was a big project this week, and I love Choose Your Own Adventure books. So anyway, speedofcreativity.org, and I am W. Fryer on the Twitters.
Excellent. And my name is Jason Neiffer. I blog at blog.ncc.org, and we officially released yesterday our Chromebook app list, which is our resource that we're working on for schools that are either moving towards Chromebooks or on Chromebooks and want to find great web-based applications to replace desktop applications you might have used with students before. Blog.ncce.org is the location of that effort, and I am on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach, where I post links that I'm reading to try to kind of elevate the conversation. This is the EdTech Situation Room. We're a mostly weekly podcast that deals with technology news with an educational focus. We broadcast on Wednesday nights, usually live. If you check out our Twitter feed, EdTech EdTechSR, you can get notifications of when we're broadcasting live. We love to have people in the chat room to talk along with during the show. And if you're interested in being a guest, also ping us via Twitter, and we'd love to discuss maybe bringing you on to EdTech SR. But we're here on Wednesday nights, 8 p.m. Mountain, 9 p.m. Central, and live to the rest of the world via YouTube. So join us next week and in future weeks where we will talk about the world of technology.
Good night, everybody.